Okay, so while people file up to ask questions here, we have about a half hour before we break for dinner. I would just like to take a brief second here. The next panel begins at 7:30 after about an hour and a half dinner break. The role of creativity in development. Now, I know a number of people are saying, I must go home, it's a long drive ahead of me. I would say get a hotel room and stick around. Just the couple $100 you pay in a hotel will that would be about the same price as the concert that you'll get otherwise, right? So think of it that way, and stick around. Importantly, also for the discussion, because I think what we went through today so far. And I think just to come back to what Lynn has said is that we have an opportunity now to win this. The fact that they're exposing themselves, J.P. Morgan coming out by name trying to crush Glass-Steagall shows we have an opportunity. So tonight's panel will be very crucial, and people should make it at all costs. So anyway, so let's get on with the Q&A session here.
Good evening. My name is Ed Walter, and I'm getting up here and a little bit nervous. But there's some things I don't understand, and the more I deal with people and talk to people here, the more I am understanding, so I think there's hope for me. There are some things I still don't understand. Why do they call it the Secret Service when everybody knows about it? Well, I just one of those kinds of things. One of the things that I have been thinking about this whole time I've been here is that I learned about the existence of this group of people and the motivation and the program and the thoughts and things that go with that accidentally. Okay? It was a complete accident, just chance, and I'm glad it happened. But because it happened that way, I say to myself, that's not a real efficient way of getting members. Okay, and I call us members of a group that we are directed in the same fashion to the same ends. And there's another thing that occurred to me. We have a problem with the potential of nuclear war here, okay, which will ruin everyone's day. And it's essentially the kind of thing that one would think that the people that are involved in this process, like we are, the Russians are, the Chinese are, the Australians, we've heard about that. A number of people are obviously involved in this, and the British, of course, which I don't think it's the British citizens. I think it's the government over there that's doing this, because I have trouble thinking of the British as bad guys. I mean, they were next to me in Vietnam. I mean, they were there. They were my buddies and all that kind of stuff. But unfortunately, maybe unfortunately, the people from Buckingham Palace weren't there. But it might have. I know there's one guy that was there, that he nailed a Taliban guy from 1.65 miles away. I know one guy did that. So he was obviously helping out. But I don't understand why all of these people involved in this thing don't realize where the problem really is. And people say, oh, well, the British are bad because they're doing all of this kind of stuff. The British are not bad. It's the people over there, a very small minority of the people in Britain are causing the problem. It's not everyone.
Right. Is that the basic question?
And the question would be, are not the people that are involved in the risk of nuclear war aware of that? Okay? And they're saying, we're going to destroy the whole country because there's some bad guys here. Right. Now, we know where they are. Right. Well, why don't they just click their switches and retarget?
Do you have a specific person that you'd like to ask, or is...
I'm not really sure who to ask. I think you'd be a good one.
I'll just say just briefly, and then I think Mike has some things to say on it. Actually, Mike, why don't you come up here? And then just for the rest of the people, if you have a specific person that you'd like to ask a question of, just identify that at the beginning there.
Okay, thank you.
I think the thing to focus on is when you think in your mind, who wants a nuclear war? It's hard to imagine that anybody would want a nuclear war. Even Prince Philip and the Queen who want to reduce the world's population from 7 billion to 1 billion, they certainly know that they probably won't survive a thermonuclear war. But the point is that what you're dealing with the empire, which is collapsing, which they know, of course, that their empire is collapsing. They know that the current financial system, as has been pointed out by several people, is gone. It's finished. What Lynn said about it many years ago. This is finished. It's gone. We're putting together now a very careful analysis of the way that this J.P. Morgan Bank of International Settlements move in the last few weeks is a public acknowledgement that they cannot save this financial system, and therefore they're saying, okay, forget printing of money and quantitative easing, drop it. We're just going to impose outright global dictatorship and vast austerity so that there will essentially be a new monetary system, one controlled by the few people who they expect to remain living after this kind of Holocaust sweeps the globe. And as far as the war goes, they can't implement that policy as long as nationally sovereign governments exist. And in particular, they can't implement that policy if the three great nations of the world, the same nations we've discussed, the United States, Russia, and China, if those three nations are united, they have the power to implement globally the kind of policies that we're very close to implementing here in the United States. And we're very close. Doesn't mean we're going to get it. But if there's ever been a moment where we're close to implementing Glass-Steagall and reversing the decline and collapse of this country, it's right now. And if you have, as Lynn has often pointed out, actually including India in that, but especially Russia, China, and the United States, are the only nations who, united, could implement on a global scale the kind of new global economic system to replace this completely bankrupt financial system, one that's based on the kind of great development projects that everybody here has talked about. Now, the Russians also, the British also know that. So they don't want a nuclear war per se, but they are absolutely willing to go to the brink of nuclear war and go beyond the brink if that's what it takes to prevent the continued existence of sovereign republics and especially any alliance of these great nations, which would totally threaten and could actually wipe out the empire once and for all. For that, if it's nuclear war, let it rip. That's the problem. So you have to understand the empire. You have to understand the total collapse that has already been unleashed of this imperial financial operation. And you have to understand what the LaRouche movement has done, how close we are to winning this. If you have that sense, if you have a sense of the fact that in Russia and in the and in China, people understand, key people understand what LaRouche represents to the future of humanity, and that this is the potential and the hope that we have to beat this back. So you can't talk around it. You have to actually address that issue. The fate of human civilization is going to be decided by the fight that's taking place right now, centered in the United States, but globally. Thanks.
Okay. So just to keep the questions nice and sharp, also, Helga, you're available for questions? Okay, good. So if so just identify if you do have a specific question for somebody, just identify that. So.
This is a question on Glass-Steagall, and Schlanger or Helga or the last speaker, any of them would be qualified. I'm struggling to understand. I understand that the passage of Glass-Steagall would wipe out the stock market, and clarification of why that would occur this time around, rather, as opposed to what occurred in the 30s. I don't believe that occurred. And then how would our system, which is so tied into the stock market, so many people and institutions are reliant on that. How would we survive that kind of period of having that base of funding for businesses and people in retirement and so many people that are tied into that system?
The main purpose of Glass-Steagall is to wipe out the debt that's unpayable. the $1.4 to $1.6 quadrillion, which is being kept on the books of the banks. And that's what the Fed money, and that's what the quantitative easing is going to protect. See, that was never written down or wiped out. They kept that on their books. And as Helga said, it's a Ponzi scheme. The way a Ponzi scheme works is you can have huge amounts of worthless paper as long as you have constantly a little bit of money going in. Now, that's why the question that you're asking has a slightly different fundamental to it. What most people think they have, they don't really have. People think they have a 401k that's loaded with all these good things. People's pensions have been put into derivatives and foreign exchange transactions and things of that sort. So, in a sense, you already have lost it. Just as when the stock market crashed in September 2008, trillions of dollars were wiped out. Well, what was really wiped out? People's irrational hopes that they had made money based on a speculative economy. And the fact of the matter is that we're all poor right now. You know, people sometimes ask me, what do you do with your money? And I say, I fold it up and put it in my wallet. I'm lucky, I don't have much money. Money, as Lynn has said, is a rotten disease. Now, when you begin to think about this, what it means is that what we think we have, we don't have. And so people think, well, I'm losing something, but it's already lost. You don't have it. We're losing everything because you think you have something to hold on to. This is how they're manipulating unions. The reason the unions are not supporting Glass-Steagall the way they should is because their pension funds are tied up in it. Well, those funds are gone. Any minute now they could go up and smoke. So that's why Glass-Steagall itself is not enough. What Glass-Steagall says is that the smoke and mirrors is now gone, and what you realize is that we have a banking system that's crippled by lack of real assets and an investment banking system that's sucking the life out of the people of the world. So we're going to stop that. That stops. And now we've got to take what we do have, which is a banking system and a credit system through which we can make credit available through that banking system to start projects again. So we can build something real. And this is where the real psychopathology, you might say, of the American people is, the belief in money. And some people have this idea that they just hope that it doesn't blow out before they die. And really, a lot of people think that way. If I can only make it a couple more years. And what does that say about you toward the future? So what we have to say to people is that this money you think you have, you don't have. The proof of it is the bail-ins. The banks are saying, that's not your money, that's our money. We can take it any time we want. So if we get people beyond that, then they have to look at what we actually have. We have a population that, if it's mobilized, can actually produce things. And all that's missing to mobilize them is credit. Where does credit come from? It doesn't come from money. It doesn't come from a piece of plastic. It comes from an ability of a nation to mobilize its population to carry out changes and physical transformations of nature and of the physical plant and equipment. So we're going to be going through some tough times, but they won't be prolonged, and there'll be an end point. And in the meantime, what the government does is it seizes as much as it can back from these speculators to make sure that there's money available for the Social Security, for pensions, for Medicare, and so on. So instead of killing people, we're going to save people this way.
Thank you.
Okay, so it'd be nice to get all 4 questions in here.
My question's for the concerning the major infrastructure transportation projects, in particular the rail systems, both the ones for the Americas to Russia, as well as with our Australian counterparts. I saw in the diagrams what looked like you were possibly considering the MagLift rails as part of that. Are you going to be using the normal, currently developed MagLift technology, or the Meissner self-levitating train technologies? Will you be using what's currently the current technology paradigms, or will you be using the Meissner field self-levitating train technologies?
Well, the two we've talked about and promoted is the maglev as developed by Tyson Transrapid.
Normal technology, then.
Normal technology. I have to confess, I'm not exactly sure what you're referring to with the second one. However, we also have, because Australia has really vast distances with nothing in between, we don't have a developed interior. One of our members, who's an engineer, has been jumping up and down about we should be the country that pioneers vacuum tube maglev, so we can achieve 6,000 kilometres an hour, get people from Melbourne to right across to Perth in, half an hour or something.
Well, I was also considering we can't do it in the United States because of all of our regulations, over-regulation and everything. But have you ever looked into the possibility of atomic-powered trains in Australia? That way you don't have to have the infrastructure.
Yeah, well, I'm not qualified myself to answer that. But we in the CEC, the LaRouche movement, we are looking into all possibilities.
Okay.
Actually, I would just say Hal could probably be available. Hal Cooper here. Mm-hmm. He's knowledgeable on many things, including maglev systems. So.
Okay, cool.
Okay, next question here.
Next.
The question relates to recycling, specifically recycling of nuclear waste, framed from the perspective that University of Texas physicists have patented a process, a fusion-fission process for recycling and reconstituting waste into fuel. And this technology and process, if it works, would be a very powerful tool for you to use in campaigning against the anti-green movement or the green movement in Germany especially, because they've on a commitment to abolish nuclear power, which of course seems a little bit irrational. Have you considered and keeping up on date on these new technologies regarding recycling, so that you can fold that into your political machine?
Yes, we do, but it's not the problem of information or the argument. There's transmutation studies going on. There are many qualified scientists who have proven that by going out of nuclear energy you create more problems than if you stay in the full cycle. We have the inherently secure pebble bed reactor, which was developed in Germany, but it was dismantled. The problem is that Germany right now is in the grip of the British Empire. For example, the energy exit, which the whole world laughs about, was induced to Merkel by Schellenhuber, who is a commander of the British Empire, who runs the scientific advisory institution to the government, who wants to decarbonize the whole world economy by not only getting rid of nuclear energy, but of coal, of gas, of just any non-alternative energy, which would reduce the world population to 1 billion or less. So I think that the problem is, that right now this is coming to a crash. There is a discussion among top politicians on the European level, on the German level, that the energy exit is a complete failure. That, for example, not only has it aesthetically ruined Germany, if you go from the one beautiful landscape to the next beautiful landscape, and Germany has a lot of beautiful landscapes, it's all ruined because you have these windmills, which look like, where you hang people on, and I have a vivid idea who should be on there. But, in a certain sense, this is crashing because now they've figured out that there is an actual climate change, but it's not caused naturally by CO2 emission, but it's caused by the large processes in the solar system, in the galaxy, and the position of the Earth in those larger complexities that has a change in climate. And the problem with the windmill is it only functions at a force 3 to 8. But now with the climate change, you mostly have lulls, no wind, then there's no energy. Or you have storms beyond 8, and then naturally you can't use it either because it blows out the system. So we are now importing extremely dirty nuclear electricity from France via Switzerland and from Ukraine into the German grid. So this whole thing will bust. I think the energy change in Germany is probably not going to last much beyond the next winter, because we are heading for a complete collapse, because the greenie insanity also has meant people don't want to build grids. So you have lots of windmills but no grids. So it's a whole ridiculous thing. So I think that the problem is not the rational argument which way to go, but the problem is that this has been a British plot. If you look at of who is running a lot of the activists, you have the large hedge funds sitting in London who are financing the European Energy Foundation, and they are running these activists who do the protest movements and so on. So it's highly political. And, in a certain sense, I think it's coming to an end, and we naturally are planning to surround Germany with reason. This is why, Asia is so important, because, when Asia, even Japan, are building nuclear plants, Korea is building 80 nuclear plants in the next 20 years, then you can actually show how totally irrational this policy is.
Yes, my question is for Harvey. What is the expected impact of Glass-Steagall on the Federal Reserve? You mentioned the SGT report, the anti-Fed Ron Paulians and so forth. And then the second part of that is, can you articulate the differences between the Federal Reserve and the proposed Bank of the United States?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks.
On that, we have an excellent document by Michael Kirsch on national banking that should be available out there that would actually go much more in detail than I can do here right now. But look, on your question, right now within the Federal Reserve, there's a huge debate because they don't even know how to deal with the problem of ending quantitative easing. The headline of today's Wall Street Journal is that Federal Reserve and quantitative easing face causing massive uncertainty on the stock markets. Within the Federal Reserve, you have people who now realize, as expressed by Richard Fisher, the Dallas Fed chairman, but also the Helga mentioned Wolfgang Munchau's comments. What do you do when you try to when there's no longer the pump priming coming from the Fed? So I think the important point is that this can't go much longer. It's now recognized by banking experts. There's debates within the Federal Reserve itself. And what Lynn is saying is that the way you end this thing is you basically say, we're calling in the loans. So maybe the Federal Reserve can do something good now by calling in the loans, which would show the bankruptcy of the system. Then we have to deal with the bankruptcy of the Fed. Now, basically, the difference between the Federal Reserve and national banking is very simple. The Federal Reserve is a private bank run for the purposes of protecting and advancing the power of private banks. National banking is run by the people of the United States through the Congress. Now, the problem that most people have with that is you look at the Congress and say, we don't trust these guys. Well, that's our fault, because we're the ones who elected them and haven't done anything to change them. But that's why we have to go out as the small instigating force and educate people to understand what real economics is. Because there are people who do know that what's going on is wrong or bad. There's a very excellent paper written by a guy who used to work for the BIS, who basically said all this money we're putting out there, all that's done is allowed bad assets to stay in circulation. So they know it's a problem. The difference is what I said earlier, what Lyndon LaRouche emphasizes over and over and over. Real physical production, which is wealth, You know, the ability to feed people and build houses and develop new technologies for the future versus an obsessive fixation with the bottom line profits of money. And you have to wipe the one out to get to the other.
Difference between the Fed and the national banking that is proposed by Mr. LaRouche is who owns it. But what about the debt-based currency that's currently produced by the Federal Reserve, that whole system itself?
Well, that's what Glass-Steagall does. It would take the bad assets that are in circulation and say that those are no longer protected by the U.S. government. Now, at the same time, though, you have to protect the dollar. We have to have a currency. So some people say, well, it's a fiat currency. Well, so we'll make it a real currency because we have to have some means of exchange. But what we're not going to recognize is gambling debts. And the gambling debts are done, and that's finished, and there's no debate about it. We've just got to do it.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Tony Witcher from Lake Arrowhead, California. I've got a question. I was inspired by the words of our Australian speaker here. Just as I feel like Australia represents, let's say, is closest a country more closely resembling America than any other. I mean, it's a continental country, and it seems like it expresses that same feeling of independence that America is supposed to represent or does represent. And I was just wondering if I could ask him, wouldn't one way of declaring your independence in Australia would be to withdraw from the Commonwealth? And what I'm wondering is, is there a movement to withdraw Australia from the Commonwealth?
Hell yeah. That's the plan. We are the leading Republicans in Australia, and that means deposing the Queen and the whole kit and caboodle, which is we've got to withdraw from the Commonwealth. But we've got as much of a hang-up in Australia, or probably more so, than the United States about the role of the Crown itself. There's a big blind spot. So everything we do is we're educating people from the ground up. Look, this is what the problem is. But we have this great tradition that I went through, which is the marker or the standard we can compare the Australian people to now. Say, look, this is bad now. It used to be much better. Well, and remember that the people who gave this to us, the great Labor Party who fought and achieved these advances, who stopped them? The Crown. So yeah, once you win that argument, then everyone we talk to, they all want a republic and they all want to quit the Commonwealth. I think I had a picture there of Curtin and Douglas MacArthur because there was a great speech that John Curtin made in World War II where he said, "We look to America free from the pangs of our traditional alliance with Great Britain." Right? And that relationship saved us because the British, who in the Australian psyche is mummy, had turned her back on us. She said, "Oh, we'll protect you from Singapore," and didn't. Right? And the huge effort that the Brits went to after World War II to unwind all those advances that we'd made vis-a-vis the United States was quite astounding, really. And it took them about 20 years, and the Green Movement was a big part of it. And, of course, unfortunately, in that same period, America went into real decline under Truman, etc. If Curtin hadn't have died early and if Roosevelt hadn't have died early, I'm sure we would already be out of the Commonwealth.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Rafael Flores, and I'm originally from Chicago, but I've been living in Los Angeles for some time as a civil rights activist, and I joined the LaRouche movement sometime back about 30 years ago. And one of the questions is one of my members of the family decided to bring in this magazine and say, where's this, where's this against your philosophy of LaRouche? And one of the things that troubled me was this thing about, well, it's a German people that have involved themselves in doing all these things that the British, that we're saying that the British are doing. So I would like Helga to go over and explain to me this right here, so as to how a situation like this, because in the magazine I read as it's called a trumpet.
Could you say the question one more time?
I just want to know, says
it's
how it was now the Germans that went over and took over Cyprus, the banking industries and all this. But at the same time, I remember, the question of World War II, says how the British went over and got the Germans to go over and get involved, with Hitler and all the stuff like this. So I wonder, is this a repeat of this kind of thing again? I mean, we're in a battle, but it's kind of like economic battle, Says,
right.
But at the same time, are they saying it's, the British or it's the Germans?
Okay, I'm sure.
Well, first of all, Deutsche Bank is not Deutsche Bank. It's sitting in London and it's sitting in New York, and it's they killed Alfred Herrhausen in the 30th of November in '89, who was probably the last major decent banker in Germany. He was for debt cancellation of the Third World. He was for developing Poland with the model of the Kreditanstalt für Wiederaufbau, the credit bank for reconstruction. He wanted to use Poland as a model to develop the Warsaw Pact countries, which was exactly the policy which we had at the time, which Lind proposed. So they killed him. And they put in other people instead who are entirely non-German. They are part of this cabal of investment bankers who go for Ackermann, who wants to have 25% profit. He's a Swiss. So, no, what I'm saying is, a lot of things which are labeled German are propaganda, because, you have right now the people in Greece and Spain and Portugal and even Italy who have Merkel with swastikas. I mean, I hate this woman Merkel. I cannot hear it when she says, Europa, we need more Europa. I have,
that
in the meantime,
like,
I have
they need more clothes.
My hair somehow stand up in my neck when I hear this Europa. But anyway, so, but it's not her. I mean, she is a terrible woman. I really think she's a disgrace for Germany. Schäuble is a nasty guy who really would sell his grandmother more quickly to get to Europa, So I'm not defending these people at all, but you have to understand one thing, that the present EU is the problem. Because when the wall came down in '89, it was the combination of Margaret Thatcher, Mitterrand, and Bush Sr. who imposed the euro as the price for the unification. And the deliberate idea behind that was to prevent Germany from, basically developing the East, to have a relationship with Russia and the other former Comecon countries, and to contain it. And there were articles deliberately saying we have to contain Germany through self-containment by imposing the Maastricht Treaty, which was the idea that Germany should be forced into a currency union, which was fundamentally against the German interest. Now, the Eurozone was never a so-called optimal currency zone, simply because you have 27 European countries, and I think 16 Eurozone countries, which are so diversified, and it's not like the United States, where you could also say you have Alabama and Tennessee and Illinois and completely different countries, and it still works as one currency. The difference is we don't have one language. We have different languages in Europe. We have different cultures, different histories, different mentalities. And that's good. I don't want everybody to be alike. I don't want everybody to be like the Germans or like the Greeks, but the two combined make a more interesting combination. So it was imposed to deliberately destroy the German economy. And the German economy right now is about flat. Germany, the great industrial nation, is about to collapse through a combination of attacks, the euro attack, the energy change attack, and if this is not reversed, we will collapse. That's the reality. And the whole propaganda that Germany is the big beneficiary of the euro is just not true. All the bailout money went from the taxpayer, the German taxpayer, because it's the largest industrial nation, they had the biggest share, to the banks. Which banks? French banks, Spanish banks, British banks, German banks, but especially, all these investment banks. And what did these banks do? They turned around and speculated with the money they just got from the taxpayer against the bonds of the country from whom they got the bailout. So it's a complete fraud. It has nothing to do with nations. It has to do with the fact that the EU, latest since the Maastricht Treaty was imposed, and the entire process from Maastricht to Lisbon has been the imposition of an empire trying to eliminate the sovereignty of each country. And right now we don't have any sovereignty in any country left, which is why we not only need independence from the Commonwealth in Australia, but the program with which the LaRouche movement is operating in Europe is Glass-Steagall first, but in the same package, a return to the sovereign control over the own currency, the D-mark, the franc, the lira, or whatever you want to name it, and then go for fixed exchange rates like it was before Nixon abolished that in 1971, and then have a credit system, and then have a reconstruction program for Southern Europe, exactly like what NAVAPA is for the United States. We have worked out a whole development program for the Southern European and Mediterranean region, reaching into Africa, reaching into the Middle East. So it's not that fascism is coming, it's a danger, but it's not the German people. And I violently want to really stress this point, because the German people right now is being victimized in the same way like the Spanish people or the Italian people or the Cyprus people. It's the question of the empire, and either we destroy this empire together or we will all be the victims of it. And, I'm absolutely determined to win this fight, because the alternative is not acceptable.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I kept forgetting to say last question, but because we have Canadian representation here, I figure last question.
Hi, my name is Scott Jorsvik. I came with Robbie Lightefin from Vancouver, British Columbia, San Francisco's sister city, proud to say. Feels like home being in San Francisco. I just wanted to mention, the idea of a credit system and the benefits of it, or what has transpired in history and what I've learned about it. Canada went through its greatest economic period in the post-war period due to its public credit system created by the Bank of Canada from, just after the war until 1972, when it was taken off the credit system and the debt transferred to private charter banks. The other thing I wanted to mention was to do with NAWAPA, which is what our affiliate, we're trying to create a movement in Vancouver, which is a Vancouver branch of the Committee for the Republic of Canada. And we've got our own poster of the Queen with the Hitler mustache, and we get lots of reaction from that. Just so that you know that we're not all monarchists in Canada. But, one thing that I did note growing up in was particularly interesting for me, being a British Columbian, is that we have a proud heritage of part of the Nawapa Plan, which was the Peace River Project, much like the Tennessee Valley Authority, created by W.A.C. Bennett back in the 60s, I believe. And our affiliate, Matt Ehret, wrote about it, and his battle to create it was tremendous, fighting the Ottawa Mandarins, as he calls them, the agents of the oligarchy from Ottawa, who did everything they could to suppress it and to put it down. And an interesting story is that W.A.C. Bennett, being the savvy politician that he was, he came to Washington when John Kennedy was here for a funeral of a senator or congressman, and he used that time to tell him of the plan and to get support for it on the American side. And he did. Mr. Kennedy's press secretary came out later and made a statement about it, and it changed, created public support for the plan in Canada, in BC, and people got behind it, and it happened. And the last point I want to make is that he went ahead with this project because the British oligarchical system, again, is one that their whole basis is, well, you don't need to build it because you don't have an economy. Mm-hmm. And he said, no, it's more like the Field of Dreams. Build it and they will come. And that's exactly what happened. And the other point is that they didn't even have the technology to transmit the energy at the time. And because of the project, because it had an objective to complete, they did within 2 years.
Okay, good.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Just real quick here, I just want to have everyone in the room give a big shout out or round of applause for Mike and Mihua and all of the San Francisco crew here. There was many people that went into building this conference, but I think it was notable that the work that they did as a relatively small crew to pull this thing together, and I just think that's notable.
Well, what I want to announce really quickly is that the conference does continue tomorrow. It continues tonight as well. I'm not presuming you're not going to be here. I presume you will be. But the discussion tonight will be somewhat special, as it was. These things are sometimes they have to be somewhat of a natural development. But we intend tonight to have a chance to discuss some of the more intimate questions of the human mind and human creativity in the context of a very, very special concert. Tomorrow, around 9 o'clock in the morning, we will also have what we've traditionally called a cadre school, which will be a continued development of some of the scientific conceptions behind a real economic policy, a real sense of the human mind, and that'll be happening at the Doubletree Inn in Burlingame. And everyone is invited to attend that. It'll be at the Sequoia Room, I think, the Sequoia or Redwood Room. But that's at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. So I would invite everyone, and if you have guests or friends that you've now been provoked by with some of these ideas that would be interested in that, I very much encourage you to invite them. That'll be from about 9 to noon tomorrow. We'll end promptly around noon. So I wanted to extend that invitation and make sure people knew about it.